This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Summer's almost out and fall's calling. Luckily, Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead, all under $100. Discover new arrivals from your favorite brands like Mango, Princess Polly, Wave, Free People, BDG, and more. Whether you're planning a last-minute getaway, heading back to class, or refreshing your office looks, you'll find the latest trends and beauty must-haves without breaking your budget. It's easy, too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores, and at Nordstrom.com. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
Hi, I'm Casey Seiler, the managing editor of the Albany Times-Union, and welcome to NXIVM on Trial. This is going to be a weekly podcast where we discuss what has happened in the week in the trial of Keith Raniere, the sole remaining defendant in the federal criminal prosecution of the leadership of the secretive organization known as NXIVM. I am here in the studio with one of my favorite journalists, Brendan Lyons, our investigations editor and Capitol Bureau chief here at the Times-Union. Brendan, thanks for taking the time.
You bet. My pleasure.
So let's get right to it. Just for some background on the trial, which begins on Tuesday with opening arguments, correct?
That's right.
The investigation of Keith Raniere and the leadership of NXIVM appears to have been kicked off back in the beginning, or the middle, I should say, of 2017, with reports that first appeared on a blog out in Western New York that reported that a subset of women within NXIVM had been branded as part of what's been described as a master-slave sex cult within the larger organization. But the federal charges that Keith Raniere is facing in the Eastern District, which is primarily Brooklyn and points east, cover a broad range of activities, alleged activities by NXIVM that go back years. So how would you describe the strategy that federal prosecutors appear to be using now against Raniere, but previously against 5 of his other associates within NXIVM?
The difference with the federal prosecution in this case than what you've seen in other cases, similar criminal cases, is that they assigned a task force to this case. And that task force has immense resources and began probing the background of NXIVM as far back as the beginning, interviewing everybody they could interview, interviewing defectors, using federal grand jury subpoenas to gather information that seemed to support or possibly refute some of the allegations that were being brought to them. And so in this case, rather than simply paring down and going for a couple of charges that could easily be proven in court, the Eastern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office there, has brought a case that has gone for every allegation that we've ever heard of about NXIVM, from visa fraud to money laundering to Keith Raniere's alleged sexual exploitation of young girls. They have tapped into their immigration fraud, their use of fraudulent documents to bring Mexicans and others into the United States who are part of their organization and were used in furtherance of some of their criminal enterprises. And so we're seeing that's the reason in part that it's a racketeering case. This enables the government to go after conduct that might be outside the reach of the statute of limitations if they brought it as a straight criminal charge. So what they're doing is they have a two-pronged approach in this indictment. The racketeering portion of it is there's about a dozen predicate acts that are part of this greater racketeering conspiracy, and they go back many years. They just need to prove a few of those acts to sustain the racketeering counts. But you always want to have a backstop, and that's what they've done. So in addition to the racketeering conspiracy counts, they have also brought straight counts against Keith Raniere and some of the other defendants, which are accusations such as sex trafficking, visa fraud, identity theft. So that enables them then to get a conviction on those counts if the racketeering counts for some reason would fall apart. So it's a carefully crafted case that seems to really show the depth of the resources when you get into a large U.S. attorney's office like the one in Brooklyn.
Of course, we don't know who the witnesses are going to be. We have some expectation about those. We should note at this point that there have already been, and coming in really quick succession between, I guess, sort of the middle of March and the middle of April, 5 guilty pleas already brought in the case against all the other defendants except for Keith Raniere. That includes Lauren Salzman, who is the former president of NXIVM.
Nancy Salzman.
Nancy Salzman,
yes.
Thank you. Lauren Salzman, her daughter, Claire Bronfman, who is the heir to the Seagram's fortune, who has been a major benefactor, probably along with her sister Sarah, who is not involved in this federal prosecution, probably the leading backer of NXIVM going back years and years. Kathy Russell, who is a bookkeeper for the organization, and Allison Mack, who is an actress. She was on Smallville for many years, and she has been identified by prosecutors as being kind of the co-organizer of this master-slave organization that was a subset of NXIVM.
And these women all pleaded guilty to felonies. It's unknown whether all or any of them will testify. I think the government is going to take the approach of breaking this case down piece by piece, and they'll see how each part of the case is developing and what witnesses they may need to call. Kristen Keefe, who was a former legal liaison and part of Keith Raniere's inner circle, and who had alleged years ago many of these same crimes. She is said to have been prepped as a witness in this case and may testify as well. She's
been on the run from the organization, or she
so
left.
To speak. She's at least
left the
hiding.
organization
Yeah.
about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now.
2014.
Right.
Yeah, she left and immediately contacted law enforcement authorities and gave them information about Raniere, which again appears to have been left on the cutting room floor. Nobody did anything with it that we know at that time. In part, that was also because Raniere and this organization have access to very powerful and sharp attorneys. And those attorneys sometimes would be used to go into law enforcement agencies to convince them that the allegations that were being brought to them were meritless. And so they could convince law enforcement sometimes to back off or not pursue criminal cases against them. But so the only one we know that has a cooperation agreement attached to her guilty plea was Lauren Salzman. It's possible that the others were given a proffer of, if you cooperate, we will recommend that the judge show leniency or give leniency to you at your sentencing. That's possible. It's unclear whether the government will in fact call any or all of the co-defendants of Raniere to testify.
Is that in part because if they are put on the stand by prosecutors, any testimony they give, conceivably, one strategy that the defense could take is saying, well, you are appearing here, through the sufferance of federal prosecutors, that your assistance in this case could result in leniency, and therefore that could injure their credibility.
Certainly. And the government may be reluctant to call them because some of them have been so loyal to Raniere through the years. It's possible they would show sympathy for him from the stand, or maybe take blame for some of his crimes. So I think they're going to be very cautious in what those witnesses, how they may be used if they are in this case.
But what does it mean that Raniere is now the sole remaining defendant in this case? Are there ways that simplifies matters for him, or does it kind of pile the rocks of what he's up against even higher?
I think strategically for him, it's helpful to stand trial alone rather than with the co-defendants. It's now him against the world, so to speak, and he will, I think, try to show that these charges, that he became a target of really a character assassination. and that all of these allegations have been taken out of context and blown out of proportion, and that women were not coerced to have sex with him, and that indeed they used stencils to show where they wanted the brand. Even though they were lied to about what that brand was, they were told it was a symbol of the elements, when in fact it was his initials along with Alice and Max, and that they were not coerced. One of the witnesses that he intends to call is someone from Mexico who they've indicated, his attorneys have indicated, may testify that there was no coercion involved. She willingly was in DOS and never knew of anyone being asked.
DOS is the organization. You should explain the name if I can get you to pronounce the Latin.
Oh boy. Well, let's use the translation term, which is master or lord over the obedient
females.
Women.
Yeah, right.
Female companions.
Yeah.
So, it's again, this club, it's worth noting, all of these allegations, or most of them, of the criminal activities of NXIVM, including money laundering and kidnapping plots and identity theft and computer hacking, had been made public for years. But it was this club within NXIVM, this secretive organization, that was even hidden from Nancy Salzman and some of the other top members who were not aware of it. Part of this was that you had to remain secret. You could tell no one about this when you got into it. It was a great compartmentalized system he set up to basically, according to the government, groom women to have sex with him, to be loyal to him. And they would gather damaging information on these women to keep them under wraps. But it was the branding that seemed to finally push everything over the edge for Keith Raniere. It drew the attention of the Eastern District of New York. They put together this task force, and suddenly this thing was running downhill. It was a pretty rapid investigation because it began, I think, around November of 2017, and he was arrested, the following March in Mexico, and then within a few months of that, the indictment of all of his co-defendants were handed down as well.
Keith Raniere is the only one of the defendants who has remained in custody since he was arrested back in March. The others were very briefly, I think, brought into custody, and then they were released on bond or bail, but fairly high in the case of many of them, because when you're talking about somebody like Claire Bronfman, she is richly resourced, potentially.
Sure. Basically, home confinement are the conditions for the co-defendants. They have electronic monitoring in some instances. And so for Raniere, too, he is also, we're told, the only defendant of 6 in this case who was not offered a plea agreement. There was no offer, and the government is not obligated to do that. I think what their position is, you can plead to the indictment, every count, or we're going to take you to trial, and that's where we're at now.
So, last question: you've been covering NXIVM for several years. What is it like after so many years of talking to sources who are, many of them, very scared about going up against this organization, having to rely almost on sort of crumbs of statements that we're able to get from court documents, from lawsuits? There have been a lot of them, NXIVM being a very litigious organization over the years. I mean, what is it like, or what has it been like for the last year or more now since the arrest, to see so much information, alleged information? These are, of course, in large part prosecutorial releases, search warrants, what have you. To see so much of it come out, is it almost like drinking from a fire hose?
It is. And, the amazing thing is to see the government, through its filings, sustain all of the information that were reported on this organization by the Times Union and by others, but certainly by the Times Union, about his alleged sexual exploitation of minors, about the fraud, the kidnapping plots. They have found information that sustains all of it, and for the first time, we're able to write these allegations without fear of repercussion from NXIVM or its litigation machine, because it's the federal government, the U.S. government, who is now saying, these are the things that these people have done. And in fact, all of his co-defendants have admitted taking part in this conspiracy and each committing criminal acts in furtherance of that conspiracy, including computer hacking. I always thought it was so far-fetched that Claire Bronfman would have implanted a keystroke logger on the computer of her father, Edgar Bronfman, to keep track of his conversations with Hillary Clinton, with other world leaders, and yet now to see, hey, the government says, yeah, they really did that. It's pretty amazing.
So we should say that a lot of the discussion that we've just had is backed up and expanded upon by a significant package that you've put together for the Sunday paper on May 5th. We recommend that people go and check that out, either online at timesunion.com or in classic Dead Tree mode, available at your latest or your local newsstand. Brendan, thanks a lot. We really appreciate your taking the time.
You bet.
And just a reminder, next week, the second edition will include commentary and observations from the first week of the trial of Keith Raniere, absent a late guilty plea, or
right.
One assumes, or some other unexpected event. And that'll be with Rob Gavin, who is going to be our man in the courthouse down in Brooklyn. We want to thank the sponsors of this podcast, Jeff Anderson and Associates. This podcast is a production of the Times-Union. Many thanks to Brendan Lyons for the conversation and all of his good work, as well as to the technical assistance of Will Waldron and David Lombardo. I'm Casey Seiler of the Times-Union. Thanks very much for listening.